The music. Awesome, thank you. Well, welcome everybody to LCAP Workshop number 2. Thank you for joining in and logging into that survey. We'll share it again later so that participants can complete it. We just want to know who's in the room today. I'm Naomi DeMacaulay. I'm a director in the Assessment, Accountability, and Continuous Improvement Unit at Riverside County Office of Ed. And our team and I are happy to have you join us for our second LCAP workshop of the year. And so as you can see on your screen before you, we've got some norms and just a few norms in housekeeping. I think everybody's familiar with how to unmute yourselves when you want to share something or offer a comment or question. And then, of course, you can click on the chat if you would like to engage with each other and respond to anything that we are posing. And then finally, there's a link to a note-taking guide. For those of you in your district teams, when we go to breakouts, a lot of them will be in district teams for this session after each section. If you'd like to take notes and follow along, there's a note-taking guide there. You can click on that link that says note-taking guide, or you can click on the image if you happen to have the PDF open. You'll get directly to that note-taking guide, and I will put that link in the chat for you. There's that, so that if you want it, you can access it and feel free to use it. You'll see in the resources folder, there's a folder for each of your districts, and in your folder is a particular note-taking guide. It's the same one for everybody. I just put your district name on it. Please let me know if you're having difficulty accessing that. And the folder also includes any materials, including the PowerPoint for today. All right, next slide. Please rename yourself so that for my colleagues who are working on logistics and will be creating the breakout rooms, we will know which room to put you in. Give you a moment to do that. All right, so if you don't know where the 3 dots are, if you look at your little picture on the gallery view, there are 3 little dots in a row. You would click on those dots, choose rename, and then it gives you an option to type in a little, in a box. And so just find your district number, your first name, last name, and your organization, please. Awesome, next slide, please. All right, so let's practice this and let's get into breakout rooms so that we can see that we've got it. We all have it right. So in your chart, you're going to be in triads. And so please introduce yourselves and take turns talking about these 2 items. What you did over the break that really refreshed and renewed you, and something you might need help with or that is weighing on your mind today. And with that, we'll have 5 minutes for those breakout rooms. And my esteemed colleague, Brian, will get you into those rooms, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Esteemed Jeff Vaca on the governor's budget and the details that it laid out about the COVID safety plan, in other words, the CSP. We'll look at the annual update template and instructions. It's still in draft form, but we'll take a look at what's in it for us when we start completing it. Brian is going to go over metrics and data and ways to measure student progress for this coming LCAP. And then our esteemed colleagues from Loyola Marymount are going to go over the LCAP toolkit to support English learners. Your district should have received 1 copy of it, and they will, during their presentation, share a way to have access to it digitally as well. And so if you don't mind, just so that we make sure that we cover what you need today. What do you hope to get out of today's session? And please type what you will respond to that question in the chat. What do you hope to get out of today's session based on what you see on the agenda today? And while you're typing in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker, which is Jeff. So Brian, if you don't mind going to the next slide, we'll sort of multitask and have our colleagues. Thank you, Janice, for your comments there. And Jeff, I will hand it over to you to lead us through your update.
All right, thank you, Naomi, and good morning, everyone. Happy New Year, everyone, although the jury may still be out on that one. This will be interesting today because quite a bit of what I'm talking about this morning relates to the governor's proposal on the Safe Schools for All plan. And the landscape around the prospects for that plan have changed somewhat dramatically in the last 24 hours. So I'm still going to share the details, but then I'm going to share a little bit of information about what happened in a legislative hearing yesterday so that you're all completely up to date on what we think is going to happen, or I shouldn't even say what we think is going to happen, what might happen in the days and weeks to come. Then I'll also walk through some of the major proposals that are in what we would call the normal K-12 budget for K-12 schools, and then share a little bit about proposals on early learning, special education, et cetera. So basically the framework for this year's budget, we're in an interesting and somewhat unprecedented situation where in the Budget Act that Governor Newsom signed last June, all of the economic quote unquote experts at the Department of Finance and the Legislative Analyst's Office were projecting that our revenues were going to be severely depressed in the remainder of the 1920 and then the 2021 fiscal year. And so they had to take actions such as deferring apportionments to K-12 schools because they didn't believe they were going to have sufficient revenues in order to be able to make those payments. And then we get to the fall, late summer through the fall, revenues have been coming in not just at a pace that we would normally expect, but even greater than what we would normally expect. So we're in this weird situation where we have a short-term surplus that affects 3 fiscal years, 1920 through 21-22. And then we're going to go into a period, or at least as the projections indicate, where we're going to be in a shortfall. And that's always a little bit of a challenging time because there's always the temptation, I know, for LEAs and districts across the state to, when there is revenue to spend and allocations going out to districts, to use those for ongoing expenses. But most of the money that's in this year's budget is one time in nature. And so as your districts are making decisions about programs, that's something that just needs to be kept in mind. But I guess the key takeaway here is that things, at least in the short term, are much better than we expected them to be. So then on the next slide, I'm going to go right into the Safe Schools for All plan. And as proposed by the governor, and these conversations really began in the week after Christmas leading up to New Year's Day, they started to release information about the plan. The 4 pillars of funding, it's $2 billion that would be used for in-person instruction grants. That equates to a per pupil allocation of about $450 per student. That would be the base grant. Then they would apply the local control funding formula. So theoretically, depending on your number of unduplicated students in your district, that grant could increase to a level of $750 per student. The goal, of course, would be to begin bringing at first TK through 2, as well as students with the greatest needs back for in-person instruction, and then layer over that TK through either 5th or 6th grade, depending on how your elementary schools are structured by mid-March. There are components in the plan for safety, requirements on testing and contact tracing, and those are 2 of the issues that have really caused a lot of concern with stakeholders and members of the legislature. And then vaccination, and that is was a really key issue in yesterday's hearing that I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes, because there are a lot of folks that are really building their reopening plans on the premise that their employees are going to be able to be vaccinated. And as we're seeing the somewhat, I don't think chaotic is too strong a word to use, rollout, there's vast inconsistency across the state in terms of school employees being able to have access to vaccination. For example, I know some folks, my colleagues at RCOE that are in this meeting today that have already gotten their first shot. I live in Sacramento County, and I'm probably looking at least a 2 to 3 month period before I'll be able to be eligible for a shot. And that's the case all over the state. It just depends on where you are and what the supply is in that current area or in that specific area. Then they've also developed a state cross-agency team, folks from Cal OSHA, Department of Public Health, and others, with the goal of providing hands-on support as schools are developing and then implementing their safety plans. And then lastly, and this is really one of the more important parts of this, they're developing a state dashboard, and these requirements for reporting go into effect next week, that LEAs are required to submit data on the number of their students that are in in-person instruction, that are in distance learning. There's also some requirements around data for the number of cases that have been contracted at the school site. And that information is really just going out through county offices of education to LEAs today. So, they're doing a lot of this is, last minute nature. And again, it's going to be somewhat rocky, I think, as this begins to become something that folks get used to doing. And the intention is to have it done every 2 weeks. So then on this next slide, and this is what frustrates a lot of us that do the kind of work that I do up here, and I'm sure many of you as well. Can we really even call this a quote unquote reopening plan when the key requirement for being able to reopen is that your county has to hit that threshold of 25 cases per 100,000 people per day? And in Riverside County, as I'm sure you all know, we actually improved a little bit this week. We went from 107.2 to 95.9, but 95.9 is still well above 25. And in the weekly calls that we have with Riverside County Public Health, they've given no indication that they see that gap closing anytime soon. In fact, they're not even sure that we've seen the complete surge from the last holiday break. Now, as folks are able to become vaccinated, that will have an impact, but no one really knows at what point we're going to reach 25. And if we get to April, May, and we're still above that line, then this really doesn't become a reopening plan for Riverside County. And that is a point that we have made strongly in our communication with members of the legislature and legislative staff. So this is kind of the piece that I would say is not going to happen, because based on what happened in this hearing yesterday, and the hearing yesterday, it was the Senate Education Committee and the Senate Budget and Fiscal Review Subcommittee on Education. So all of the folks that have responsibility for K-12 policy and budget. And they had 3 panels. They had the administration, Department of Finance, and Brooks Allen, Executive Director of the State Board of Education. They had the legislative analysts provide their input on the plan. They had a panel that had 3 representatives from K-12 management, 2 school superintendents, and a governing board member from San Diego Unified. And then they had 3 representatives from labor, CTA, California Federation of Teachers, and CSEA. And then the hearing concluded with a public comment period. And it was very clear from the outset that the members of the committee have numerous concerns about the plan as it's been proposed. Concerns about equity, recognizing that the rate at which counties reach that 25 cases threshold is going to be vastly different across the state. The fact that in some areas of the state, schools have been open for some time, as far back as October, November, and we're just exacerbating the inequity by developing a plan that creates the impression amongst not just stakeholders, but communities that schools are going to reopen. One of the things that the superintendents were very eloquent about yesterday, and one superintendent was from Campbell Union School District in the Bay Area, the other was from Natomas Unified in the Sacramento area, was that you're creating this huge problem for us, because what our community is hearing when they hear the governor talk about this is that schools are going to open on February 16th, because the piece about, well, you have to reach 25 cases, the threshold, that doesn't get the same amount of attention as just the whole reopening issue. So it was a 5-hour hearing, and speaking with some of my colleagues that have been doing this as long or longer than I have after the hearing yesterday, we agreed that we had never seen a governor's proposal get savaged by members of his own party as badly as this one was yesterday. And so I looped back this morning with one of our key contacts in the legislature, a key staff member for the Senate. And I just said, look, off the record, not for attribution, there's no way that a plan can be approved by next Friday. Is that a fair statement? And the answer was yes. Because before a plan to get approved next week, it would have to be in print and then voted on by next Thursday. So you can move ahead forward, Brian. I don't want to spend too, I just want to make sure everybody understands that that this is the weird situation that we're in right now. And in a moment, I'm going to put in the chat. I shared with Dr. Gomez last night a message to send to the district superintendents, which I believe did go out last night, and I'll share with you what was in that message. So, I'll just go briefly through these components, because I'm really, some of this will probably stay the same, but some of it is definitely going to change. The funds are intended, or will be intended, whatever it looks like, for a wide variety of uses. Testing, and this was another issue that came up yesterday, the testing costs would probably eat up most, if not all, of that per pupil allocation. But then they have other uses, facilities upgrades, even compensation, social and mental health support services. And then the way they had intended for it to be structured, you would be able to use those funds through the end of the calendar year. One of the points that we made in our communication to the committees was that, look, if our districts can't open because they can't meet that requirement in this current school year, then allow them to be able to have access to those funds through July 1st of next year. And we may see some changes along those lines moving forward. Oh, okay. So I did put a slide in here. I got this in here last night. And you see, I've kind of already talked about these things. I think the one that really caused the greatest amount of consternation, and they're going to really have to get their act together if they want something to work, is that lack of a coordinated vaccination strategy. Hopefully, as we're seeing increased efforts at the federal level in that regard, that will sort of trickle down to the states. But we're just going to have to take it, I think, on a day-to-day basis as we move forward. So then the second piece of his proposals for quote unquote immediate action is that academic intervention and extended learning time piece. It's a pretty significant allocation, one-time Proposition 98 funds. And the intent was be to provide LEAs with the time needed to really put together plans to for those targeted interventions that would focus on the students of greatest needs. And again, the uses are pretty wide, a pretty broad spectrum of what you could use these funds for. I think I have those outlined on the next slide. Yes, I do. Um, and nothing terribly shocking here. Extending instructional learning time, closing learning gaps, learning supports, integrated pupil supports, supports for credit deficient pupils, additional academic services such as diagnostic assessments of the learning needs. That's one thing that we've talked about quite a bit at RCOE. And then just training and support on strategies for really the trauma that not just students and families, but I think staff as well have been going through during this period. So you should keep thinking about these things, because at the end of the day, it may not look exactly the way that the governor has proposed it, but many of you have heard me say before that politics trumps policy. And the politics around this proposal is that we have a governor who does not want to be recalled and desperately wants to get something in place to demonstrate that opening schools is his top priority, or at least among his top priorities. So we can expect something to happen. It will likely happen, at least, in the framework of the work that we do, fairly quickly, but not likely, or really almost impossible to happen before February 1st. And that is the message that we have been conveying to all of your districts. So that's about as much fun that we can have in 1 month, I think. But then we also have the regular, quote unquote, regular proposals. We're looking pretty good with Proposition 98 funding, much better than we anticipated because of the reasons that I talked about a little bit earlier, that revenues, in fact, have come in much more quickly than we anticipated. So still on that upward trend for Proposition 98. And then on the next slide, that equates to about a $2 billion increase in LCFF funding. A new term here, a compounded combined COLA of 3.84%, sort of applying the COLA that was not granted last year in the 2021 fiscal year, and then a 1.5% COLA projected for 21-22. And then you may recall that one piece of legislation that we talked about quite a bit last year was Assembly Bill 1835 by Dr. Shirley Weber, who has just been nominated as our new Secretary of State in California, to restrict the use of supplemental and concentration grant funds as they carry over from one fiscal year to the next. So he vetoed her bill to do that last year, but indicated that that change would be part of his budget proposal. And we don't have that language yet, but they also indicate in the budget summary that county offices will be required to review those funds with more specificity than has been required in the past. And if my colleague James Whittington is on at this point, I think he wants to add a little bit more on that piece. Are you there, James?
I'm here. And yeah, thanks, Jeff. I just want to hammer a couple extra points home on this potential language. So, as Jeff mentioned at the beginning, we're going to a period of probably some additional growth for maybe the next year or two, and then some contracting years in the state budget. So, um, almost a perfect storm here with the possibility of restricting the supplemental and concentration dollars. And like Jeff said, we don't have the language for it quite yet, but the the premise of restricting it uh, leads me to believe it will likely become a restricted categorical program in its own resource. Um, the the language about county offices having more scrutiny of those funds means we go from a review of a plan to a review of an actual expenditures, which has never been the case. And your auditor has always been focused on that actual spending. So I want to caution you guys to be ready if you need to start identifying where these expenditures would fall into a restricted resource. But at the same time, I can't reconcile in my head how, from an accounting standpoint, we can have something that is a restricted categorical, but not necessarily a dollar for dollar requirement. So seeing how the state moves forward with this proposed legislation and turns it into something actionable will be unique and challenging, I think, for you guys and for us on the county office side too. So I guess my cautionary tale here is, if you're not tracking your supplement and concentration expenditures in some way, shape, or form, like we've been saying for the last few years, you really need to start having those conversations so that you can be ready if we do implement something like this, especially if it goes forward in 21, 22, or 22, 23. But it's likely it would be sooner rather than later. So I want to caution you guys there. The other piece related to this is all the COVID relief funds and the learning loss mitigation dollars. There's a lot of I don't want to use the term shell game, but there's a lot of overlap in how those funds can be used and will likely be used, because we're trying to address some of the same issues with the same population. So just a cautionary tale at this point until we have more language, but wanted to put this on your radar and really drive the point home that this language could have a significant impact in how the LCAP is built and how you guys monitor the LCAP throughout the year, and then also how we as the county office are reviewing and approving the LCAP. And Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, James, and I apologize I thought I was muted when I was coughing, but apparently not. Been fighting a cold all week, just what you want to be doing in the middle of a global pandemic. So Naomi, how am I doing on time? Am I good still?
You're still good, Jeff. Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to run through the rest of the key proposals in the governor's budget. You'll recall that there was a significant number of apportionment deferrals that were built into the 2020 Budget Act. Most of those are being paid down. The deferrals will still take place in the fiscal year that we're in right now, but then be paid off as we move into the next fiscal year. And an additional deferral in the 21-22 fiscal year of $3.7 billion is proposed in the governor's budget. Now, this is going to become a subject of, I think, some debate with the legislature, because clearly we're in a position right now where the state could pay down all of these deferrals. And so the question will be, well, why aren't we? Wouldn't that be a better long-time use of these funds than some of the other proposals in the governor's budget, as worthy as they might be, that would provide a different kind of benefit? So we'll have to see how that plays out. I think there are good arguments to be made on both sides. And an example of one of those, that a block of proposals within the budget, has to do with investing in educators. We've seen many investments in these programs in the past, and this is where we really see the fine hand of Linda Darling-Hammond, who's now the president or the chair of the State Board of Education, from the Learning Policy Institute. She has long advocated for programs such as teacher residency programs like the Golden State Teacher Grant Program and the Educator Effectiveness Block Grant. But I think this is what one of our colleagues refers to as a budget crumple zone, that if revenues were to go south and the situation was a little more challenging than we might have anticipated, these might be the first to go, these proposals. And these might also become the trade-off if more members of the legislature believe that a more worthy long-term investment would be to pay down those deferrals. So I wouldn't put the ink on these yet, but there will be a lot of support for them as well. And then there's also a component on special education. I believe these are very similar, if not identical, to the original proposals that we saw in last year's budget, but which were then withdrawn when it appeared that we were going to be in a very tricky fiscal situation. So funding for that really focuses on the youngest children to get the service to them as quickly as possible, development of professional learning networks, and then looking at special education placements and oversight in non-public schools, which has been an issue discussed for a number of years up in Sacramento. And then student mental health, as we all know, has been very prevalent in our minds in recent months, just because of the closures and the situation that we're in. The gist of these proposals is to try and incentivize the development of more effective partnerships and collaboration between county behavioral health departments, schools, and getting those funds that are intended to be used in the school setting, but in many instances have been somewhat hoarded by counties that don't pass them away, pass them down, or pass them over to schools, and really trying to push that funding into the school setting where, particularly right now, they're really needed. So then I think we're near the end. Early learning, as you may have seen in early December, Governor Newsom released his master plan for early learning and care. And this proposal really targets one aspect of that master plan, which is expanding access to transitional kindergarten. So there's funding for the upfront costs associated with expanding TK. There's funding for preparation and support of TK and kindergarten teachers. And there's funding for the facilities needs that come part and parcel with expanding TK programs. Many districts that would like to expand those programs are unable to do so simply because they don't have adequate or sufficient facilities in order to do so. So there's a lot on the plate this year. And, you know, I think James used the term unique and challenging, and it's almost as if we deal with that every day right now in terms of governmental relations. Things happen quickly, and as they do happen, we will, of course, provide information to Naomi and Melissa and the team to share with all of you. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, or at least try to answer any questions that folks have. And you can always reach me at my email address as well.
Thank you, Jeff. We're going to give some processing time for the district teams and put you in your groups for team time. We'll have 15 minutes for this. And so if you have renamed yourself, thank you, with your district number. Well, shortly, Alicia will get the renaming screen right back on. And in the meantime, Brian is going to put everybody into district teams for some team time. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had some great discussions. And if you have any questions that Jeff can answer, I believe he's still with us. You can unmute yourself, or please add them to the chat. And if we can't get to them all in the next few minutes, then we will make sure to get back to you with all the responses. Jeff, are you still here with us?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to open it then for any questions for Jeff. So Jeff has posted something in the chat. If you want to continue to ponder, feel free to populate the chat with any questions that you have, or feel free to unmute yourself.
Jeff, this is Lois Schaefer down in Blythe. The expansion of TK programs, is it just the buildings, or is it also changing the age for TK?
No, they're not. They're not doing what would probably be the most helpful and important thing to do, which would be to allow the students in that group, that TK group, as I'll call it, be eligible for state funding. they're just kind of doing workarounds, unfortunately. So it's like they're fronting the costs of providing those funds for those students, but they're not changing the age in statute.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right. Well, as you think of any, please go ahead and populate the chat or unmute yourselves. At this time, what we'll do is I want to thank the ILN members who were able to join us this morning. As you know, you can always reach out to us, Jeff, at any time should you have questions. And we will go ahead and go to our break. So please return at 10:05. You're welcome to turn off your videos, and we'll see you at 10:05. Have a good break.
Timeline for this when Governor Newsom signed SB 820, there were some changes that were made to the annual update template. In October of 2020, the first draft came out, version 1, and it was presented to a variety of stakeholder groups. There was some feedback that was received, and then draft 2 was created, and that was in December 2020. It was presented again to stakeholder groups, and they have until the end of this month, January 31st, to present us with the finished template. So we're hoping soon, the end of next week, really. SB 820 was released, and part of that was that the 21-22 LCAP, the annual update template, includes now the learning continuity and attendance plan and the 1920 LCAP. So both of those pieces are going to be commented on in your annual update template for this year. So that's one of the big changes. All right, and we're going to go through that right now. So in the annual update, and LEAs are required to report on the progress made towards achieving each of the goals in the prior year LCAP, the implementation of actions planned to support those goals, the estimated actual expenditures, and then a description of how this analysis has informed the development of the LCAP for the coming year. So a reminder that the annual update, the purpose of the annual update is to share with your stakeholders, how did it go with your LCAP, right? So you put these, we have these goals and we had these actions, we plan to spend this money, and then how did it go? Did we put these actions into place? Did we spend the money that we had planned on spending? And so we're going to do that for our 1920 LCAP, but then we're also going to do that for our LCP in this annual update cycle. So there's 2 pieces to the annual update this year. Of course, there's the template and there's the instructions. And we always have to remember when we're looking at these 2 pieces that we need to look at these 2 things together. If you are working on this and you're writing this as the writer in the seat, that's why you're all here, and you're just looking at the template and you are going through it and you're just reading the prompts that are on the template, you're not going to be giving enough information. So you have to be very explicit in using the instructions. So just a big reminder that the prompts that are on the template are for the reader, right? For the parents, your stakeholders. And the instructions are for us writers, right? For the people who are writing it. So we have to make sure that whenever we're writing these, anything for the LCAP, that we're making sure that we're including everything that's in these instructions. So these things have to go together. So we're going to look at these together right now. And I'm just going to go through the annual update part. And then Naomi's going to walk us through the LCP section.
They're both annual updates. One is just
sorry, one's for LCAP. I'm sorry.
LCAP.
The LCAP, 1920 LCAP, and then Naomi's going to walk us through the LCP. Thanks, Naomi, for correcting me on that. All right. So part of this is a lot of copy and paste. So a lot of this is going to be time consuming because you're going to have to copy from your 1920 LCAP into this template a lot of copy paste. So you're going to go back to your 1920 LCAP and copy goal 1, and you're going to paste it into the template. A lot of you guys use DTS, which is great. It does a lot of this work for you. Some of you guys don't. You might have other programs that you use, or if you're using Word document, that's fine. But you're going to copy, and it's very explicit in the instructions exactly what you need to copy and paste into this new template. So for here, we talk about you want to copy in the goals, the state and local priorities, that blue box section. You're going to copy in your annual measure, what you expected those outcomes to be, those annual measured outcomes, what you expect, what those actions and services were that you put in place for that goal, and then what were those budgeted expenditures. And those have to be copied verbatim. You can make some minor typographical corrections if you had spelt some things wrong. And then of course, duplicate those tables as needed. So that's just a copy and paste piece, which we realize can be very time consuming. And then you're going to go back, and for each of those goals and each of those expected outcomes for the 1920, you're going to actually put what happened. So you had an expected outcome, and then you're going to say, you know, this is where we want it to be. This is what actually happened. And realizing that COVID-19 changed a lot of the direction that we were going in. If an actual measurable outcome is not available, what they're asking you to do is provide a brief explanation of what actually happened. So go ahead and put that in there. Like we said, realizing that things didn't go the way we had planned this year, just explain what actually happened in that actual outcome section. All right. And then in actions and services, same thing. You've copied over those actions, you've copied those budgeted expenditures, and then you're going to put the actual expenditures. So you had planned some expenditures, and then you're going to put what you actually expended on those actions. Realizing we know things changed. So just put the actual expenditures for those actions. After you've filled out those pieces, the next part is some analysis. There's 3 analysis boxes for the LCAP section, the 1920 LCAP section. One is an overall successes and challenges, the first one, in implementing the actions and services up until school closures and through the end of the school year as applicable. So they want you to include in there a description and specify which actions and services were discontinued with the closure of schools and which actions and services were continued through the end of the school year. So you're thinking about, what went well up until school closures, and then what did we have to stop doing because school closed. The second one under that analysis section, what is describe how funds budgeted for actions and services that were not implemented through the end of the school year were used to support students, families, and teachers following school closures in 2020. All right. And I do see questions are popping up, but do I need to stop, or you guys on it?
Yeah, you can keep going. We're looking at them.
I think I only have one more. So, and then the overall analysis part, you have to respond to the overall analysis prompt only once following the analysis of each of the goals. Reflect on the progress made towards the goals in the 1920 LCAP in light of the context, excuse me, of COVID-19, and based on available state and local data and output and stakeholder input, and describe the relationship of the goals and related metrics and actions and developing your new goals for the 21-22 LCAP. So thinking about the goals in 1920, which I know seems so far away, and thinking about everything that's happened since then, what are you going to do reflecting on those goals moving forward with your 21-22 LCAP, reflecting back on 1920? So that's the what they want you to think about in this overall analysis piece. All right. So that is the annual update piece, the 1920 LCAP piece of the annual update. Are there any questions on that specific piece? Or I'm sure they're answering them in the chat.
There was one about expenditures being captured through June 30th, 2020. And Lindsay posted that yes, in the section you will say expenditures from the 1920 LCAP were actually spent through June 30th. So whatever those expenditures were. And then there was a question about, do you think the template will be revised? And hopefully it'll be minor revisions. We haven't heard back officially, but the word on the street is that the template may not be changed, but there might be clarification added to the prompts and the instructions. But we'll get clarification. I can actually email CDE and find out for us. I think those were the only two questions I saw. Did I miss any?
And then if you guys think of anything as Naomi's continuing on with the next half, of course, let us know.
Awesome. Thanks, Alicia. And thank you.
You muted yourself, Naomi.
I know, I just noticed that, sorry. All right, so the annual update is made up of both the capturing of information from 2019-20 LCAP as well as the 2021 LCP, the Learning Continuity Attendance Plan. And so for this section of the annual update, you're going to need to reflect on each of those 7 sections that were in the LCP, as well as analyze them in an overall analysis. So we'll go through each of the sections of the template. You can see this template just for optic purposes is green, whereas the other one, I think the boxes were pink. So in this section, you're going to describe your successes and challenges around in-person instructional offerings, as well as talk about the planned and actions and budgeted expenditures that you did for in-person instructional offerings. And you can see that's in the blue. And finally, at the bottom in the purple, just like we talked about in material differences in the old LCAP, here is where you will talk about substantive differences between the planned actions and budgeted expenditures and what was implemented and expended on the actions as applicable. So again, all of these 3 prompts and boxes are for in-person instructional offerings. When we get to the next section, you are talking about distance learning. And so with distance learning, there are 3 prompts also. Same thing, your challenges and successes in implementing distance learning. And the instructions actually have particular details that you would want to address for a full description. And those are listed, those 6 items are listed there. Continuity of instruction, access to devices. So very similar to what was in the prompt when you were completing this section for the LCP. Then you've got the table for your planned actions and budgeted expenditures related to distance learning. And just as is the case for all of the tables, you are able to add rows as needed. And then finally, the substantive differences description between planned actions and budgeted expenditures goes in the very bottom. So it's going to be the same pattern for the next one. So when we look at pupil learning loss, same thing for your descriptions there. For this one in particular, the instructions do ask for effectiveness of the efforts to address pupil learning loss for all students, but particularly for our unduplicated students, our English learners, our low income and foster youth, as well as pupils with exceptional needs and those who are experiencing homelessness. So what was done to mitigate their learning loss? The substantive differences section, I'm still in that one, sorry, Alicia. So in that blue section, you're still talking about your actions and expenditures. And then again, that's that narrative for the substantive differences. The next section are the 3 combined. So there are, it looks short, but I know your narratives will make this section a little longer, but you're going to talk about all of those same things for mental health, social and emotional well-being, pupil and family engagement, and school nutrition. So all 3 of these topics will be addressed for these prompts here. And you can see the instructions there detail what you need for each to make a full and adequate description. And if you recall, the LCP at the end of all of that had a box for additional actions. And so for the annual update, you'll be noting those planned actions and budgeted expenditures, as well as any substantive differences between planned actions and those expenditures that were made for that. So again, it's those 7 sections, and the final section of the annual update for the learning continuity plan is an overall analysis, just like it was for, just like it is for the 2019-20 LCAP. And so I split the slides into 3 so we can look at the details of the prompt. So in the first prompt for overall analysis, you're talking about lessons learned from implementing in-person and distance learning and how those informed your goals and actions for the upcoming 2021-24 LCAP. Oh, excuse the typo there on that year. And so as part of this analysis, the instructions say LEAs are encouraged to consider how their ongoing response to the COVID-19 pandemic has informed the development of actions, and in particular, talking about health and safety, distance learning, mental health, social emotional well-being, and engaging pupils and families. When we get to the second prompt, this one is talking about pupil learning loss. And so in the instructions, it does ask to focus on those pupils with unique needs, all that I listed above in that 2 slides ago. And then the third prompt talks about differences between what you've described as doing for actions and service and what was actually implemented. And so that's what the third prompt is about. And essentially, I mean, it seems really short. I know it's not, because you're going to have to do some thinking around this and reflecting and to gather your stakeholder input on it. But to that end, just on what we've covered on the template, does anybody have any questions around that?
Naomi, Melissa put a comment in the chat. I wonder if we would invite Melissa to repeat it on camera so it's in the recording, because I think it's a good point for everyone to keep in mind.
No problem. Basically, what I was sharing is that the process of the annual update is the same as it's been in prior years. We basically, it does require a lot of copying and pasting from the previous plan, and then asks districts to report actuals or estimated actuals along with a reflection on how things went. And this is to inform stakeholders of how much was able to be implemented, how much funding was attributed to these actions, and then, you know, how effective things were. The biggest change this year, aside from having a new template for because of the change in not having an LCAP this year. So our biggest change is that we're going to be reflecting on 2 prior years. Instead of just reflecting on 1 prior year, we're going to be reflecting on the 1920 LCAP and then the 2021 LCP. And that will enable our stakeholders to know specifically what was implemented based on the 2019-20 LCAP, plus what we planned and implemented for, you know, during our period of school closures during the 2021 school year.
Yes, thank you for underscoring that, Melissa. All right, so what we're going to do is give you, oh.
Go ahead, Alicia.
I was going to say, yes, Diane, it does need to be approved alongside it's part of your LCAP. So yes, it's alongside your LCAP and before June 30th.
Yes, thank you. Melissa, you were going to add another comment?
I was just going to answer Diane's question.
Okay, awesome. All right, we're going to give you some time to process with your teams then on this annual update. We'll give you 20 minutes in your district breakout rooms. I believe just about everybody's numbered. And so Brian is going to put you in breakout rooms. Here are some prompts to guide your discussion, if you so choose to ponder them. What's your understanding about how the annual update template and instructions are structured? What is your understanding about the prompts versus the instructions? And what questions might you have?
And we would also encourage you, if you already have gone through some of the prior sessions with the annual update template and have seen the template, have a process conversation about how are we going to accomplish this, knowing that we have both our program and fiscal team on the call today. If there's any questions about your internal process for completing a reflection on 2 prior years, that's a little bit different than we have been asked to do in past years. So have a process conversation as well.
Awesome. All right, enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the part of the presentation. I know that you were just woke up this morning excited for as we jump into metrics and data, looking ahead as you're developing this year's LCAP. So as a reminder, the 2020 dashboard, as you know, was not published in its previous form. If you go to the dashboard page, you actually will see there is a page, but it only contains very limited data. And this is a result, obviously, of the pandemic, suspension of state testing, and Senate Bill 98 put that suspension into law. Go ahead, Alicia. So as I said, if you go to the dashboard now, you will see essentially the school or district demographics from your enrollment for the 1920 school year. And you'll see some links. So there are some data that is populated that's available for your use and to the public. Go ahead, Lisa. So this data is live now. It was out in preview a few weeks ago. And the main thing that they populated under the additional reports are your 2020 graduation rates that are important, that are reported the same way that previous dashboard data was reported. So what you will find on there is your combined 4 and 5 year rates for comprehensive high schools, the 1 year dashboard rates for any schools using the dashboard alternative school status. And then for districts, you will see a combined blended rate for your district that combines your 4 and 5 year rates and your 1 year DAS rates. Please note that this data is different than what was previously published on DataQuest as your four-year cohort graduation rates. The dashboard uses a different methodology to give you credit for those 5th year seniors that might graduate in the following year. And of course, there is no equivalent graduation rate for DAS schools that's published on DataQuest. They use special rules for that graduation rate. So, so while it should be similar, it should be very close. For districts, please, we recommend that you use these dashboard rates as you're developing your LCAP, and I'll get a little more into that here in a couple of slides. There is a link there to the crosswalk. I'm going to go back, Alicia, to a data crosswalk that will specify those differences between what's published on the dashboard and what's published on DataQuest and the reasoning for those differences. The other data that is now live and published is the College and Career Indicator supporting data. So this is the grid that shows you how many and what percentage of your students in 2020 met the various College and Career Indicator methodology to be counted as meeting that standard. So you can see how many of your students met, say, for completing a CTE pathway, or met through the A through G components, or taking college courses, and so on and so forth. You will see that breakdown, and you could compare that to previous years as well. So it's a really nice report, especially looking at those different outcome data. The other thing that will be soon public, just yesterday, a private preview was released for your suspension data for last year. So if you have not seen that yet, reach out to your CalPADS person or your accountability director, and they should have access to that data as of yesterday. And you could see your official counts for 1920. I will point out specifically what CDE is saying is you should not compare your 1920 suspension data to previous years. For the obvious reason that when schools closed at the beginning of March, you lost a pretty good chunk of the year, and probably the chunk where the bulk of your suspensions happen. So although the data is out there and will be public probably next week, it's not really comparable to previous years. The other update that they announced just yesterday, and it's the last line there, is they have made the decision that chronic absenteeism data will not be published publicly for the 1920 school year. They determined that because of the nature of that and the rules that they had around including students in the chronic absenteeism indicator, that they just couldn't find a way to get that data valid and reliable for last year. So although you have access to your local absenteeism data for last year using your SIS, they are not going to publish that data publicly. Go ahead, Alicia. So as a reminder, on the various accountability indicators, one of the LCAP regulations require at least one indicator for each LCFF priority. And so you can see this listed there. And what we've highlighted is the local indicators that relate to various LCFF priorities. Go ahead, Alicia, next slide. And that is because you are required to consider local indicators when you're developing your LCAP. This is actually a change that was put into law last year in 1920. You were in the process of doing this, I'm sure, by the time school shut down in March. So this never quite finished. And of course, you never reported last year's local indicators on the dashboard because they didn't publish them on the dashboard. But now the cycle repeats again. So for the 2021 school year, the current school year, you are required to once again complete the self-reflection tools for this school year and use those self-reflection tools as you're developing the current 3-year LCAP. So all of the stakeholder engagement that you're already doing, you have been doing, you should be also including getting input on those local indicators and including that as part of your process. And then as you're developing and writing your LCAP, make sure you're reflecting on that. You will need to take your local indicators this year, current year, to your governing board as part of your LCAP adoption process. So when whether that's in late May, June, you're going to take the local indicators and report those to your board just as you've always done in the past. And then you will report these later this year for inclusion in the 2021 dashboard. So typically that data collection happens, the deadline's usually like November 1st. So once you complete this process for this year, you take them to the board in May or June. You're going to report them in, say, October. They're going to show up on the dashboard in December. And so you will not be scrambling in October to finish these like maybe you have done in the past because you're completing them now. But of course, next year in the 21-22, you're going to repeat this cycle once again. So just a reminder to how you need to be working on these now. So Links on this page include a link to the CDE local indicators page, a link to FAQ that's sometimes helpful, and that third link is the link to the actual document that's the self-reflection tools. There are no changes from last year for the self-reflection tools. So, they've not sprung any new changes there, but make sure you're working off the latest document. It did change last year from prior years. Go ahead, Alicia. So just a reminder now that although there's not the traditional dashboard, they are not, that doesn't mean we don't report anything. We obviously still have to report metrics. And there are several required metrics, and we're going to have those on the next couple of slides. And this is really where you're going to be generating that baseline data in the template. So per the instructions, it says use the most recent data associated with this metric. And so that obviously is going to be a little challenging this year because of the suspension of the dashboard. But I do have some recommendations for you that you'll see here on the next couple of slides. So go ahead, Alicia. The other requirement when you're setting up your metrics for the LCAP, you are required to, as to the extent possible, report it in the same manner and consistency with how the data is reported on the dashboard. So, so think back to that, the information I shared a few slides ago about graduation rate. That's another reason why you want to be using the graduation rate that's posted in the dashboard additional reports versus what's reported in DataQuest, because it is reported differently. So you want to align to the extent possible as to what is reported on the dashboard. Go ahead, Alicia. So now we're going to jump into these required metrics. So when you submit your LCAP for review, this is one thing that the county office is going to double check, that you have all of these required metrics. Of course, this is the minimum standard. There's probably lots more that you will include. So on this first page are the state priorities that really you can satisfy by completing the local indicator self-reflection tools, and maybe including some of those self-reflection tool data in that baseline column. Obvious examples like fully credentialed teachers, you're already reporting that on your local indicators, or on your self-reflection tool there. So that's pretty easy to transfer over into your LCAP. So you're already doing this work. Just take advantage of that and include it on your LCAP. Next slide. So in the pupil achievement category, this is where you're gonna have to do some thinking here. So the first one on the list there is the state assessments specifically stated for CASP. And so you're not going to have a choice here. You're going to have to go back and use your 2019 data as your baseline because you just did not give these results at all. You didn't give the assessments at all in 2020. So, so you'll go back to the 2019 dashboard for ELA and math. And then of course, science, you'll need to pull up those data reports for your LEA and include that data as your baseline. That's going to be the same thing for the last one that's highlighted there. Pupils prepared for college by the EAP. Those are your 11th grade CASP results for ELA and math. The number of students that scored a 3 or 4 on that in 11th grade. So again, you're going to have to go back to your 2019 data for that baseline when you're preparing your LCAP. However, we know that that's probably not going to give the whole picture of what you might want to show, for example, for learning loss. So this is a good point where you probably want to be supplementing these with additional local metrics. So if you've been giving your local measures, MAP, iRating, whatever it might be in your district, you probably want to include that in addition to these required state metrics. That's going to help show that need and that baseline of learning loss that you can then address through your LCAP, and in subsequent years, hopefully report good progress. So just be thinking through how you might need to supplement these because it's old data. The other one here, and we've gotten a few inquiries on this about what to do about the EL, the percent of EL progress on making English proficiency. So technically, you do have 2020 data on this. You had some students, some EL students that probably completed the LPAC in the spring before closures. And then every LEA that I'm aware of at least assess some of their ELs during that fall optional LPAC window. So you do have that data. However, I would not recommend that you use that 2020 data for this purpose. The reason being is you likely did not assess all of your students, all of your EL students. So, so whatever rate that you might be able to manually compute using your 2020 data compared to your 2019 data, I don't think it's going to give you a real accurate picture because it did not include all students. Plus you have the confounding variables of distance learning and remote administration and all that. So for this one, once again, I would recommend that you go back to the 2019 dashboard and use the rates that are posted. Remember, there wasn't a color in 2019, but you do have the rates. It did list what percent of your students made progress on LPAC from 2018 to 2019. So, so if you use that as a baseline, I believe that will give you the best comparison when you're going forward through this LCAP over the 3-year cycle. So 3 years from now, when you're comparing your EL rates back to this baseline, this should give you the most accurate picture of how you're doing. Obviously, we know there's going to be some valleys here as we get through shutdowns and distance learning and all that. But 2022, 23 probably compares better to 2019 than to 2020. So just think through that. And I think as long as you articulate that to your stakeholders, they're going to understand that. Go ahead, Alicia. So the last page here, again, is a couple of issues. So let me start at the bottom. So suspension rate. Once again, I would recommend that you use 2019 data as your baseline for suspension rate. I don't think your 1920, the state has already said in writing that you can't compare 1920 data to previous years. So, so if you use your 1920 suspension rate as your baseline and try and compare that 3 years from now, you're going to run into problems. So 2019, I believe, would be your best match for that. Think real carefully about attendance rates. Now we know chronic absenteeism rate is not going to be published. So I guess I needed to update this slide through. For chronic absenteeism rate, your only choice is now to go back and use 2019 as your baseline for chronic absenteeism rate. Attendance rate, I think you have a choice to make, because you can calculate your attendance rate using your local SIS data. And so I would just ask you, is that accurate? Is your P2 attendance data that you reported? Now, I know that the attendance cutoff for 1920 was through February 29th. Normally your P2 data goes into April. So, so you can look at your rates locally and decide what's the best rate to use for comparison purposes. But you, again, my recommendation would be you probably want to use your 2019 P2 attendance rate versus your 2020 P2 attendance rate. So if you have questions on that, feel free to reach out. If you need to have your data person reach out to me or to Nick Chitwood or Steve Aon, we can help walk you through how those rates are calculated, how they're calculated for the dashboard, how you might use your local CalPADS reports to calculate some of these rates. We'll be happy to help you through that methodology so it's consistent across years. So let us know. But it does, we recognize it creates a lot of challenges. But really remember this year, it's all about establishing that baseline. So as you go forward in the LCAP over the next couple of years, you're comparing to a real number and not some number that's heavily impacted due to COVID. Go ahead, Alicia. So just a reminder again what this looks like in the template. So this is a schematic, and then we do have an example on the next slide. So on the actual template, you're going to identify what the metric is. You're going to use, you're going to establish your baseline. So whether that's from 2019 or more recent. And then all you're doing for this year, when you're developing this LCAP, is you're trying to identify your target, your desired outcome at the end of the 3-year cycle. So you're not filling in any other data this year. So just baseline and establish your outcome. So next slide, Alicia. So this is an example, and we've used this example before. You've seen it before, but this is our example of using Smarter Balance Assessment, ELA. So we're going to report what our baseline is. Notice that we're reporting the baseline for not only all students, but some targeted student groups. And this is where for every LEA, it's going to be different, right? If you've got, I know it's very common for a lot of districts that you probably would include students with disabilities on this list, because that's a student group that you want to be able to report progress on. In particular, if your district has been identified for differentiated assistance, you want to take a look at what student groups are contributing to that identification. And you want to make sure that you're including those student groups in those state priority areas on your baseline metrics. So again, students with disabilities, academic performance, if the indicator's red and that's leading to your identification for differentiated assistance, then you would want to make sure that you included students with disabilities on this list. Again, if you, we've published out a lot of that data on the different districts, but feel free to reach out if you want to make sure you're including all the correct student groups. And then again, the other thing you're filling out for this year's LCAP is that desired outcome. So you're filling out that last column. we will point out on this slide that notice that the targets are different between all students and all the different student groups. So for all students, we want to increase by 15 points above standard. But for English learners, it's actually an increase of 35 points to go from -30 to +5. So depending on the student group, you might need to differentiate the different outcome targets. All right, next slide. So we went through this in detail last workshop. I'm not going to do it again, but our colleague Steve Ayan has created just an absolutely fabulous tool in Tableau to help you with setting those targets. So, when you pull this up, you can pull up your LEA. Of course, it's available for schools. Schools can use this when they're writing their SIPSs. You pull up your 2019 dashboard data, and then the right side populates with your data, and you can help you identify your student groups, what targets you might be realistic for them for different student groups over the 3-year cycle, where you might be. So if you didn't get a chance to dig into this, this is available to you. The next slide is also included. It was from the last workshop. This is a great little video that Steve created of him navigating and walking through this tool. So, it's a great resource. Recommend you look at it if you haven't already, and it'll walk you through how to use that tool. So that is a resource that's free for you to use. It's public out there, and we do recommend it. Now it's going to start playing, so click it again. There you go. All right, last slide for me right now is to just kind of have a conversation around what additional metrics that you need in your LCAP. So what I outlined for you on those 3 slides are all of the required metrics. That's what's in law, that's what's in statute. That's what those of us at the county office that will review your LCAPs are going to be checking off to make sure you include. But obviously, that's not going to tell your whole story. One in particular that's not really captured in those metrics, those required metrics, is really student social emotional health and well-being. And so, that's one area where you probably want to include additional things. I know, many of you using Panorama, education, those kinds of things. So I'll just throw that one out there in particular. I already mentioned including data on your local assessments. Go back one, Alicia, you went too far. Already included a conversation about like MAP or iRady or whatever the local assessments to really capture learning loss. And so in particular, think about one of the purposes of your metrics and metric review is to establish the need. You're using as part of your needs analysis. So if you can't establish a need, then how do you spend money on it later to help solve it? How do you create an action around that? So even though the data might not be all that pretty, but you probably want to include it to help you establish, here's why we're going to do these actions on helping decrease learning loss, because here's what our data is showing us. So partly it's to help establish that need. It's to help you with progress monitoring throughout the years, provide the ability to course correct along the way. So as you're writing this 3-year LCAP, a year from now, obviously we'll be doing this all again. you're going to need to have some metrics to help you decide, are you on the right track? Are there things we need to revise and change or stop doing? Or are there things we need to start doing now in the new yearly update? And then obviously provide transparency to stakeholders. The other thing that's there in red is to really think through this year using this LCAP to help you identify and then help you to measure your response to any particular needs due to COVID-19. So obviously this year, over the last really full calendar year, you have a whole host of things that you didn't even know were problems a year ago and identified now as a need. And you know that the legislature and the governor keeps throwing additional things at you to measure, with Jeff Vaca's presentation earlier today. So I have updated this interim metrics list. That's this document. We've had some version of it over the last couple of years. And Alicia, can you click that link so it opens up the document? And once it opens here, so what I have done is I try to go through this document and think through what are some additional particular metrics around the COVID-19 issues you might want to consider including. And some of this is informed on what you had to report on in your LCP that you wrote a few months ago. So for example, under student access to instructional materials, so in the local indicator self-reflection tool, you're going to reflect on access to materials. And that's always been done around making sure kids have textbooks as required from Williams Act. But one thing that in very particular you had to report on in your LCP was student access to internet and devices. And so I know some of you had to spend a significant amount of dollars to get devices for kids. You've invested in infrastructure. I read in a couple of your plans, you've invested in creating your own LTE networks across your district. So that's something that you're probably going to want to include in your LCAP going forward, and something you want to report your progress on, not just this year, but over time. So just think through how you're going to tell that story. If you've spent $1 million stringing wire on poles in your district, you probably want to let your stakeholders know about that and tell your story. The other one I have on this page is facilities in good repair. And so you're going to, again, report on that. You report the facility inspection tool, the FIT reports on your local indicators. You report that on your SARCs. But now the added element that you probably want to report on is around COVID-19, cleaning protocols. If you've added out infrastructure, plexiglass shields and all that, that may be something you want to be reporting on. So you refer to your COVID-19 safety plan. Go ahead and scroll down until we see red again here. There we go. So scroll up just a little bit, Alicia, because this talks about parent involvement. So you've always had to report on your parent involvement in those different categories and parents involved in decision making. That's part of the self-reflection tool. But the added element, you had to report on this in your LCP that you wrote, was participation in online meetings. So again, it's just an added nuance that you probably never even thought about prior to last March. So so that would be another recommendation. I think there's one more, Alicia. So when you're thinking about attendance, and again, you have to report attendance rates. You have to report chronic absenteeism. We talked about that on the previous slide. But the other thing that I would recommend that you probably want to report specifically on is participation in distance learning. Again, you're already collecting this data on your weekly engagement record, and you're doing all that work around that you had to put in place through your LCP. So that may be an additional metric that you want to include on your as your baseline this year, and then going forward. So you know, I think a lot of us are anticipating that distance learning is probably never going completely away, even when COVID's kind of done. You know, hopefully we don't have whole districts and schools on distance learning all the time, but we think, you know, this isn't going to go away overnight. So again, that may be something else to think through in conjunction with your attendance rates, chronic absenteeism, thinking through how you might report out your distance learning participation and including that as a baseline this year. So I think that's all the red, so we can go back to that. So anyways, you do have that document. It's included in your materials. And of course, the link is there. That's what I have for you. So once again, we're going to, let me look over the chat. I see some of you have been answering for me as I talk. So is there anything from the chat that we need to address?
I might have missed it, but I didn't catch anything, Brian.
Okay. All right, I think, yeah, I'm seeing that too. So, all right, so again, we're going to give you some team time to talk through with your district colleagues what we've gone through, and thinking through what this looks like on this year's LCAP. And again, after team time, we'll come back. If there are any questions that are generated, we'll be happy to try and address those. So so once again, if you've left us and come back into the Zoom meeting, you probably lost your renaming. So we'll try and get you where you need to be. But here are questions that we have for you to think through for team time. So what's your understanding around the dashboard and local indicators? How might you use that Tableau setting tool? And if you haven't had a chance to play with it, you might want to jump into that. And then thinking through really this idea of, okay, so what additional metrics are you going to include in your LCAP? What else might you want to think through in general, but also specifically related to COVID? So with that, we're going to send you off. I'm going to open the rooms, and we'll see you back in about 15 to 20. If you want to unmute yourself and speak out, we'll be happy to hear from you.
We, as a district in Moreno Valley Unified, we had a question regarding the identification of the COVID fund. I mean, the money spent on COVID, because supplemental funds that came for those purposes, and they weren't necessarily spent out of the LCAP. So are we supposed to notate them here, or are we only supposed to put what we used LCAP funds for?
So I don't believe you need to identify in the annual update the source of the funds. So I know for the new LCAP year, you need to designate whether they're LCFF funds or federal funds on that spreadsheet. But I might defer to one of our fiscal colleagues to specifically answer that question. If any of them are still on the call.
I can speak up a little bit, Brian. So you're talking about 3 different forms, right? So the LCAP 1920 LCAP did talk about source. 2021 LCP didn't talk about source. And then the 21-22 LCAP is now bringing back in source, correct? So it's depending on which section you're looking at, you are having to refer to a source for portions of your expenditures. And then depending on how your district fills in your LCAP and what you call those dollars, a lot of our districts will call them LCAP dollars, but what they really mean is supplemental and concentration. But not all of our districts do it that way. So if you want to reach out to me, we can discuss kind of how your district does it in the plan moving forward.
But Lindsay, on the annual update, I don't think there's a place to designate funds. You're just reporting your estimated actuals for LCP. You're reporting estimated actuals for the 1920 LCAP. You're reporting actuals, but you do not report the source of funds. You're just reporting what you did. Am I right, Alicia? You're muted, but I think you're saying I'm right.
There's not a space for it in the template that I can have seen. So there's no place to say this is where it came from. It just says estimated, and then it says actual. So estimated expenditure and then actual expenditure in the template as of now.
Any other questions we can help answer before we wrap up our portion of the morning? Okay, Naomi, I guess I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome, thank you. Well, before we break for lunch, I had two announcements. One is, and I'll post it in the chat too so you can see. I got an update from Josh Strong at CDE. He said that the final version of the annual update template has a few revisions to it. And so you'll note that he says that in the final revision of the template, 2 of the prompts have been combined into 1. The analysis prompts have been reordered to follow the action tables, and 1 of the prompts has been moved. The instructions will include some additional specificity for some of the prompts and will provide some additional suggestions for LEAs to consider. And Josh also said that he anticipates having it out by the end of next week. So that's the update there on the annual update. Any questions, just put them in the chat or let me know. And then after lunch, I wanted to share we have, yes, you wonder why the EL programs Ed Code 52064 is showing. I wanted to preview what's coming up. It's going to be a wonderful session after lunch. As you know, that a common thread through all of our LCAP workshops has been underscoring meeting the increased improved services requirement for unduplicated students. And last year we touched on Ed Code 52064 when it was revised to include the requirement for English learner actions. And so we discussed it, but we didn't get to the point of implementing it in the LCAP since the LCAP was paused for 2021. But after lunch, to support and underscore our work around this, we have our colleagues from Loyola Marymount who will present on the LCAP toolkit developed by their team to support LEAs in developing meaningful actions to support English learners. And so that's what's coming up. We hope to see you back at 12:40. So please enjoy your lunch and we'll see you back then. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you at 12:40. And we will, before we jump into it though, Alicia would like to provide a clarification on the annual update for the 2019-20 LCAP. And then,
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Alicia. I was just going to say, and then she'll pass the baton to Lisa, who will introduce our next presenters for the next section. Take it away, Alicia.
And I just want to clarify, and Lindsay, back me up here, something that I said right before we left, and I think it was a question that Melissa asked about putting in the different codes for, there's no specific line for that, but remember that you're copying everything from your 1920 LCAP verbatim into that budgeted expenditures piece. So anything that you wrote in there, you're going to copy it over, just like you did before with your other annual updates. So anything that you've written in there is going to be copied over. Is that so? Lindsay, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so just on that note, 1920 will look just like you've been used to before. It will include source. So when we were talking about source earlier, your 1920 annual update will include source. The 2021 LCP annual update does not include source because the format changed. So that's what Alicia means by not having a place for source. That portion won't. So they do look different in that aspect. And then we'll move on to 21, 22. But just to clarify that this piece of the 1920 LCAP would have both source and dollar amount in those budgeted and actual expenditures.
Thank you for that clarification, Lindsay and Alicia. Again, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we'll always support. All right, is Lisa here?
I
Our
am.
esteemed colleague, awesome. Your turn, Lisa.
All right, well, we are really excited to have our next presenters on the call with us today. So as in the past, we've had guest speakers present at our LCAP workshops. We've had Josh Daniels from CCEE and Janelle Kubinek from WestEd presenting on topics such as defining the base and really what it means to increase and improve services for our unduplicated pupils. So we have invited colleagues from Loyola Marymount University to be with us here today. It's Dr. Elvira Armas, and then we have Dr. Magali Lavadens here with us today. And this is part of the EL Rise grant. I know many of you are already participating in other opportunities that we've been provided through this grant this year. We have our English Learner Roadmap series for administrators. I believe we have I think it's almost 120 people from our county participating in that 7-part series. And then we launched our other series yesterday, Elementary ELD for Teachers and Administrators. That kicked off. That was session 1 of a 4-part series. So because we're part of the EL Rise grant, which stands for I'm totally blanking on this one. English Learner Roadmap Implementation for Systemic Excellence. I got it. I knew it would come to me. Too many acronyms in our world. So we affectionately call it EL Rise because it is such a mouthful, but this is another opportunity that we're being presented with as part of our participation in this grant. So we are really excited to have them here today. And just to tell you a little bit about them, Dr. Lavadens is a distinguished professor and founding executive director at the Center for Equity for English Learners, or SEAL, in the School of Education at Loyola Marymount University. Her research addresses the intersections and impact of policies and practices for culturally and linguistically diverse students, their teachers, and school leaders. And then we have Dr. Armas here with us today. She's the Director of Programs and Partnerships for the Center for Equity for English Learners and affiliated faculty in the School of Education at Loyola Marymount University. And throughout her career, she's been actively engaged in collaborating with TK-12 educators to explore the areas of leadership, curriculum, integrated standards-based instruction, assessment, and family community engagement in culturally and linguistically diverse settings. So without further ado, I would like them to take over in their presentation of the LCAP toolkit to support our English learners.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that kind introduction, and to all of our Riverside County Office of Education colleagues, and to all of you for choosing to spend a Friday afternoon with us learning about the English Learner Roadmap implementation for systemic excellence, our EL Rise work, and particularly in this workshop, it's the first day of a 2-day session on using our LCAP toolkit, which is provided to you through EL Rise, through our partnership with Californians Together, and the tools and resources that are included in this toolkit to really support and promote equity for English learners. Our session today is joined by 2 of the lead authors of the LCAP toolkit. You heard about Dr. Adama. She'll be sharing some words with you today. Our 3rd author, Gisela O'Brien, is not here, but we're joined by another colleague who you'll hear from in a little bit, Nati. We will, along this afternoon and throughout our 2 sessions, be sharing with you digital electronic versions of the LCAP toolkit. We also learned, and what a wonderful resource your County Office of Education leaders have been. They have provided each of the participating districts with a hard copy of the toolkit. That toolkit is published by Californians Together, but you don't need to have a hard copy. The digital version is here today. Our wonderful colleague also, Maria Jose from LMU, is offering tech support. She will be dropping into your chat box, let me slow that down, many of the resources and handouts that we'll be referring to throughout our session this afternoon. A little bit more about our approach. We are recording this session, so it will be available to you to share later as a resource for yourselves, for your colleagues, as you take the toolkit, the resources in the toolkit along the way back to your local education agencies. We have well over 100 people here with us this afternoon. What a wonderful testament to the kind of professionals and the commitment and dedication that you have to all of our students. And what a wonderful way to spend our afternoon together as we look at these 4 quadrants that are our agreements about our participation and engagement together. The first is respect confidentiality. We'll have breakout rooms, but we'll be sharing back out from our breakout rooms some of the issues, the questions that may be posed in regards to your current LCAP. We know that you spent your morning looking at the new template. We'll be referring to that, but you're building from many of the strengths that you all bring to this engagement this afternoon through your active participation and your best thinking along the way. We're going to enjoy this time together this afternoon in this approach of asking questions, of reflection and engagement. On the next slide, you'll be able to see the foundation of this grant, which is the English Learner Roadmap. The English Learner Roadmap, as many of you may know, was passed by the State Board of Education in 2017 as a reversal of deficit-oriented thinking about our English learner and our culturally and linguistically diverse students. It promises to be a vision for all of us to really support our English learners in our districts, to help inform the implementation and planning for local programs, local policies, of which the LCAP is one, and really with that vision for success. We also know that during these pandemic times that no one had predicted before, we've experienced many challenges. We have an opportunity now to continue to respond to those challenges through the local policies and decisions that you all can inform in your LCAP as leaders of LCAP development in your local context. Those 4 principles of the English Learner Roadmap have been operationalized, shared across many professional learning offerings that you may have had and you may have experienced along the way, both through your county office, through the different state offerings, as well as in your local education agencies. We're focusing on the principles that really align principles 2, 3, and 4 across that, again, but with that undergirding vision of the assets and the resources and the strength that our children bring, but really to identify the conditions that need to be in place to support success and effectiveness and the alignment of those conditions within and across systems. So in this exciting implementation, of the English Learner Roadmap that was passed in 2017, a policy is aspirational, but really to translate that policy into practices, the California Department of Education really developed 2 grant funding opportunities. This grant through EL Rise is a collaboration between Californians Together, ourselves at LMU SEAL, the Center for Equity for English Learners, and the Sobrato Early Academic Literacy Program. You heard Lisa mention some of the professional development activities that are already taking place across your county offices of education. And indeed, Riverside is one of 20 county offices of education that all of the resources are being shared in order to be able to implement the roadmap. Those 6 points there, those 6 bullet points that you can read for yourselves are really about the idea of design and the intentionality with which we approach all those 4 principles, the element with the 4 principles through our local planning and policy making, that of which the LCAP is one. And really focusing on English learners' need and strengthening and supporting county offices in supporting all of you with that goal and vision for English learner success is the main intent in working together to implement evidence-based practices for English learners across the state. The timeline for our EL Rise implementation is for 3 years. We have just begun implementing our series for 2021, 2022. We never predicted that we were going to be in a digital mode. We always prefer the ability to connect with you on a personal basis, to have those kind of elbow conversations in person, but we are happy that we're able to come with you through this medium. The idea behind the 3-year implementation of EL Rise is to provide support around the implementation across a variety of roles for teachers, administrators, for families, and counselors, and our delivery through webinars, institutes, workshop, and strands. And we are one of 2 of those State Department of Education Educator Workforce Investment Grants that are intended to support the state's implementation of the English Learner Roadmap through conversation, through dialogue, and through professional learning together. On the next slide, we want to just uplift for you a couple of the resources that already have been available through our EL Rise resources. The first is a webinar that uplifted the idea of the continuity of learning and attendance plans that are being foundational to your new 3-year LCAP. That's a resource that's being dropped in the chat box. And the additional reflection tools that county offices of education have offered throughout the year and will continue to offer. Feel free to visit that website that you see linked below there, the EL Rise website, for additional resources, for webinars, and additional tools that you may be able to access at your leisure.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elvira, and as we transition to getting our session well underway, we want to provide you with a bit of a guide what our afternoon will look like. We appreciate the time that you have that you will spend with us, and the time that you have spent already today. Wanted to share a little bit about our team, including our wonderful colleague, Nati Rocha, that you'll hear from in just a few minutes, who's joined our team as an educational specialist with many years of experience in leadership for English learners. And to share with you that this is one of 2 sessions, and your Council of Education and our team has been meeting to identify for you and the 19 LEAs that are represented here today, a way in which you can experience our introduction to the LCAP toolkit and alongside their excellent work in previewing, structuring, supporting your ongoing work on the development of your new 3-year LCAP. So our sessions will fit alongside that. Your colleagues will be able to offer additional support within the county. Today's session 1, will allow us to uplift an overview of the toolkit for you. We expect that you've been able to download that from the electronic resources link that our colleague Liz has dropped into the chat. We'll talk a bit about the context. We want to uplift your voices as well. So every time together, we will have 2 breakout sessions. sessions, opportunity to come back to your and have a conversation with your team. We have 2 hours scheduled this afternoon in a synchronous space, and we will leave you with a 1 hour asynchronous task. Your team will calendar that and conduct that at a time that you feel is convenient for your team. We will utilize the information from your asynchronous sessions at the beginning of session 2, which will occur in March for your team. And you can see what the focus will be there. We'll go deeper into the aspects of the toolkit. It'll be experiential in nature, meaning you will again have an opportunity to work alongside your colleagues in your LEA groups and be able to apply the use of the rubrics and envision the use of the toolkit overall in your own respective spaces. Specifically today, we've outlined the session 1 outcomes that you see on your screen. Please take a few minutes to review them. Notice that on the right-hand side, we have a bar that indicates which of the outcomes we intend to address during our synchronous time together, and which of those will be reserved for your team to work on during the asynchronous time. We know that some of you have colleagues who intended to be with us during today's session, and we all have many other meetings and other activities scheduled. So know that the asynchronous time affords your team the opportunity to bring those who may not be able to be with us during the synchronous time, engage them in the conversation, and share the resources that you have received today. As we look at solidly the equity intent of LCFF for ELs, we'll move into some of the policy context and highlight for you an opportunity to think about how to continue to refine and build that in your respective spaces, coupled with the policy and background. And we'll introduce you to the architecture and the development of the rubrics so that you can feel confident with their alignment, first and foremost, to the California English Learner Roadmap policy, as well as the state priorities that guide your development of your 3-year LCAP. We will spend time with you identifying a rubric of your choice and getting to know some of the exemplary indicators within that rubric itself. We want to know across our 19 LEAs a little bit about your level of involvement in the development of the LCAP. We know that some of you are more involved than others. You have different roles within that, and we'd like to see how that's represented today. So our colleague has dropped in a poll in the chat. I invite you to take just a few minutes to capture that. And I'm going to share the results. So we can do this. I will go full screen and we'll see our responses coming in to have a good sense. Given your involvement in the morning, we know that many of you here are representing the lead role in writing of the LCAP. It's wonderful to see the support team members that are here as well. And those of you representing attendance at LCAP stakeholder meetings to provide input. So we'll leave this on for just a few minutes. We're getting a sense of the patterns in the room. And this will be important as we uplift and your expertise. We have a few who are joining us for the first time, not necessarily been involved in the LCAP development, will be an important voice as we explore the resources that the toolkit has to offer us and invite you to share your expertise in the chat. We welcome the use of technology to share your expertise in the chat, as well as in your small groups and as a follow-up with. So thank you so much for sharing a little bit about who we are in our trajectory and our involvement in the development of the LCAP. We'll turn to our colleague Nati to introduce herself and give us a bit of a context about how specifically we're structuring our first section. Nati.
So good afternoon. Thank you for letting me join you, and it is my pleasure to support you in your continued learning today because you've been doing a lot of work this morning. As you can see from our agenda, we have already done some of these things in session one. We've done the welcome, our learning agreements, as well as a little bit of an introduction of the EL RISE and what it means and all the different work that we're doing with you. I've also done the Institute overview and done the poll everywhere. So it is my pleasure to get us started with setting the context. And it'll be a little bit of a review, probably, of what you've done this morning, where we're going to go backwards to talk a little bit about what has affected the new LCAP, what has affected the format, the timeline, as well as some practices that might be included in the new LCAP. The first order of operations was in April 2020, Governor Newsom signed Executive Order N5620. And of course, this was in order for us to be able to continue to provide instruction to our students, a high quality distance learning because of the pandemic. And in that order, the importance of meals, as well as the arrangement of supervision for students was included. In that order and in other set of bills, there were also implications for the LCAP process and the timeline. In Order N5620, the process of writing LCAP and the due dates for the 3-year LCAP were postponed until the 2021, 2022, 23, 24. And one of the inclusions that was done as a result of SB 98 was the whole idea of developing each agency, LEA, would develop a plan for learning and continuity and attendance, which you were involved in, and this was due, and it was reviewed by September 30th. And the last part of changes, as part of SB 520, where that by July 1st, 2021, you would include both the learning continuity plan and the LCAP that was adopted. Just when we started this afternoon, Alicia and Lindsay were reminding you a little bit about what to include in this new LCAP and template as part of what you had already done. So we've postponed things, but we've also done some learning, which has really provided us with an opportunity to really think deeper into what we can do better to support the English learners. So Californians Together, and this is another acronym, CalTOG, was involved in reviewing the learning plans, the continuity and learning plans that were submitted. And there were some very interesting findings as a result of that. It was very surprising that they found that even though a third of the LEAs had indeed included very specific plans for supporting ELs, 39% of the plans had minimal explanations of how the ELs would be supported. It was also very interesting to see that 56% of the districts' written reports had little evidence about regular interactions with students. Likewise, what was surfaced was that there was a huge divide in terms of digital access. And although there was 97% of the district mentioned accessing devices, there wasn't specific continuity of how, for those students that didn't have them, for those homes that didn't have access, they would ensure that they would get them. Family collaboration, social emotional support, as well as education for dual language learners were not included in many of the plans, as you can see in this slide. So these findings really effective recommendations that will support with the toolkit and with the LCAP in improving outcomes for our English learners. First and foremost, that there is indeed designated and integrated ELD as it is required for our English learners. That we know that it is through interaction, learning is social, through talking, that learning takes place, so that there would be live interactions with the students, and a way to indeed ensure that there was technology for all students, family collaboration, so that the language of the parents would be included in the communication, so that there would be true understanding. And in these difficult times with the pandemic, that there would also be social emotional support included in the plans, and of course addressing the needs of our youngest learners, those 4 and 5-year-olds. These affected the toolkit and the supports that we will be able to provide for you with this tool. And to go deeper into the next sections of how these are reflected in the learning continuity plan, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Magali.
Thank you, Nati. So the overview and the sets of recommendations that came from the COVID written reports are actually not new, with the acceptance of the Bridging the Digital Divide that happened and highlighted the gaps. The pandemic exacerbated the needs of English learners and other communities that are under-resourced. But those recommendations are intended to support and build on these sets of policy tools that we have. The second report that Nati referred to is a learning continuity and attendance plan, that 1-year planning document that was intended to be sort of a stopgap measure while local education agencies and districts really attended to the most immediate needs that were happening to all of their communities during this 1-year period of the pandemic, but are also informational in building the next local control and accountability plan. So what we're striving to do is build a coherent set of policy documents that build upon each other around those 3 pillars of our state accountability system. One is continuous improvement. The second is improved performance. And the third is equity. And we'll be talking about that a little bit more. So look out for another report for the LCPs that Californians Together. They have used elements of our rubrics that you're going to hear more about today and in the next session as well, to be able to do the analysis of the COVID written reports and the learning continuity plans and attendance plans. And you're going to hear a little bit more about the history that led us to where we are today in the next slide. We're also going to focus on what we've learned, because what we've learned through a set of analyses, through a set of advocacy initiatives, through the gaps that we've seen over time, has led to the development of the LCAP toolkit as a proactive measure, as a proactive set of tools and resources for all of you to be able to use to bring back to your communities, to your families, to your colleagues at your local education agencies. It's not just a set of tools and resources. More importantly than that, or as important as that, is the conversation that we hope we'll all engage in together. Along the way, I neglected to mention, please include any questions or comments that you have in the chat box. We'll address them. We have a monitor in the chat box. But the toolkit is intended not just to ensure and make visible and sharpen the focus on English learners to reduce academic achievement gaps that they may have, success gaps, but also to engage you all in those conversations with your colleagues back in your local education agencies. What led to the development of the toolkit? On the next slide, you'll see the organization of the toolkit. We're going to share a little bit more about the policy and background to it in just a second. But the organization of the toolkit, we're focusing on part 1 right now, is this sort of the history and the background. And what you need to do is some non-negotiable exploration that you'll be engaged with in a little bit. Those 4 parts of the toolkit available to you are intended to be used fluidly in your local context, but are based on background information and data that you have already been exploring, but also looking at the contextual issues, the history, because if we don't learn from our history, you know, I forgot what president said, when it might have been Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we're bound to repeat it. So as we move into the first of the 4 parts of the LCAP toolkit, this background that led to where we are today is really about building from the beginning of the local controlled funding formula. And when that policy, that enormous education finance policy and reform occurred in 2013, our groups began to really think about, well, what does this mean for English learners, the group of students that we are focused on in our center and in our work. So together with California Together and the California Rural Assistance League, we developed 10 rubrics that were based on the research of Patricia Gándara and Maria Estela Zárate about how can the local control accountability plan meet the promise of attending to the needs of these 3 targeted subgroups and our targeted subgroup of focused English learners. Through the course of the years, we wrote and published these 3 reports that, as you can see from their titles, signal that we had more work to do, signal that through our analyses of LCAPs, we did not see evidence of support for English learners. We did not see evidence of resource allocation for English learners. And we, in our last report, masking the focus on English learners, because during that time of reform for our state, we were also seeing a reform in the way that data was reported through our California dashboard. So their last report, that was the critique of the state accountability dashboard system, really was intended to use the resources of the rubrics through the analysis of 26 districts LCAPs that had high percentages and high numbers of English learners. And we asked the question, is equity really revealed and substantiated in these districts LCAP? Is the intent of LCFF really manifested and evidenced in the LCAP? So we then looked at the relationship between the dashboard results and the impact and the resulting evidence in those 26 LCAPs for the years 2017 to 2020. And in that, we found some critical issues that were still remaining. Nati just shared with you the COVID operation reports that really signaled that there were opportunities, there are still opportunities missing, that there are not sufficient metrics or targets on those metrics that set the expectation in a public way, which is the LCAP, our public accountability mechanism, that signaled approaches and benchmarks to closing the achievement gaps. We found very significant and troubling impact of the aggregate definition of English learners that includes current English learner only students and reclassified fluent English proficient students, the English language arts and the math academic indicator, that aggregate definition is what significantly masks the focus on English learners, because it requires an additional burden on districts to do that disaggregation on their own. We did not have enough data, excuse me, on the LPAC, sorry, on the LP, because we didn't have 3 years worth of data. And we also found some problems with the California Spanish assessment because it did not include a writing component, particularly for programs that are dual language immersion. We have written about, subsequent to our Masking the Focus report, about the lack of progress for English learners and the lack of opportunities on the college and career indicator. And we also found reduced access and opportunity to participate in the county office expertise through differentiated assistance because of that aggregate indicator. So these critical issues also led us to think about, we've done these proactive reports and we needed something to be more, we've done this reactive post hoc reports, but the idea the inherent idea and problem with the dashboard aggregate indicator is the starting point. So we look back at the 2019 English language arts academic indicator for the entire English learner subgroup. And you see here on the left pie chart that the yellow group, which is also including the local 658 of the local education agencies across the state that were at the yellow performance level. Even before the dashboard was published, we found that we hypothesized that we were going to have problems with the yellow indicator, which the aggregate indicator, which is basically an okay. We know that those performance level that you see on the right-hand side are what results in participation in the system of support. So then what we did state for those 658 local education agencies is that we disaggregated those results. And we disaggregated the English language arts indicator for our RFEP students as well as for our English learner subgroup. And we found that the results were very different and they're very telling. And they really signal not just the masking of the focus on English learners, but omission and a neglect of the support that they really need, the support that our students really need through the multiple resources that we have across the state. So you see from this pie chart is that this aggregation on the dashboard is an essential first part of what needs to happen in terms of looking at the needs of English learners in your local contexts. To that end, we then took this data and were challenged by some other findings across the state, which I'll turn to Nati to share with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Magali. And as you're listening to these facts, this research and data, be thinking in the back of your head, how's my district dealing with the LCAP and the data? How do we analyze it? How might this affect future plans? The state auditor was commissioned by the Joint Legislative Audit Committee to review the expenditures and the services for the English learners that were intended to improve outcomes through LCFF. And there were some very interesting outcomes as part of the investigation. And indeed, what was found was that the monies were not necessarily matching the students. So even though the intent was to improve outcomes, some districts, some LEAs were utilizing this as an opportunity to do more services for all, as opposed to improve the outcomes for English learners, as I said before. So two of the recommendations that the state audit had was to reconcile those estimated amounts included in the LCAP with the actual amounts that were apportioned by the state. And the second big one was in that indeed the monies had to follow the students. And if the district had additional funds that were left out of the LCFF for the following year, they were to be used for those students that were identified as needing it. So money followed the students. Another one of the pieces of research that influenced was a collaborative effort by LMU, by PACE, by USC, my alma mater, and other agencies, in which they were looking at 8 specific LEAs with English learners. And as a result of interviews, analysis of data, and various other means, they discovered that indeed we were lacking, that indeed that equity intent once again was not being matched with what was resulting for the students. There were lots of misunderstandings. For example, 20% of those that were interviewed thought that equity meant equality, whereas equity is intended to not be equal, but indeed to have increased funds for those students that need it the most. So there needed to be additional time to re-clarify and to communicate the intent of LCFF. The other one of the recommendations that resulted from this joint collaborative was that there needed to be an opportunity to build the capacity so that indeed those local actors would have sufficient expertise to be able to support their schools, their districts in developing the plans and executing the budgets. And the last of the recommendations was to review the efficacy of the revised LCAP template. It was too much that was trying to be done. So how can we be very specific and narrow it down so that the ability of that tool to achieve multiple purposes? At the beginning, we talked about there having coherence and alignment. You're busy enough as it is. So we wanted to be very purposeful and efficient in supporting this. So that's a lot of information in the last half hour, and you had a lot of information in the morning as well. You're going to have an opportunity right now to engage in doing some dialogue and in discussing some of what you've learned up to now and some of what you've reconnected with. And there are two large questions within this one. And it has to do with how does your district approach the equity intent of the LCAP? And how does this information that you've learned or you've reconnected with in the morning as well as now, how does that information extend your understanding? The way that you're going to do this is we're going to send you to different rooms where you're going to have an opportunity to talk with other folks, maybe from other districts, because this is being done at random, and go deeply into what is your learning and reconnecting it to the way that your district approaches LCAP. We have put, and you'll have 5 minutes to do so. We will call you remind you prior to the 5 minute time expiring. You're now going to be sent into these small groups.
Perhaps we can have a couple of you shared about your definition of equity right before the break. Nati shared with you the results of some of our research and exploring the definitions and perceptions around equity and around the LCAP template. So maybe one or two of you would just pop up and share what your conversation was like in your random groups, in your random breakout rooms. And please feel free to pop in, unmute yourself and share out.
Okay, I'll pop in. I had a great group represented from 3 very diverse districts, from high to mid to low EL populations in our districts, and we kind of talked about how that question of equity can look different based on what we're doing for all students. But we also discussed equity in relation to barriers, and as an example, parent engagement. And so what enhanced efforts and are we putting it into that area of need to, to have equity for supporting the needs of parent engagement of English learners.
Thank you. So knowing what the barriers are for each distinct group is really an important understanding in your local context. Thank you for sending that. We'll have one more person share before we go to the next component of our meeting this afternoon. I also see some familiar faces right in the middle. As Tim shared, knowing who your population is and knowing their distinct needs is the first step in understanding how to deliver on the promise of equity. And what we found in our reports was the perceptions really influenced the decisions that local policy actors made when allocating resources, leading to all that series of reforms, of the advocacy around implementation of new bills and legislation, and also about the new template. So let's bring back the PowerPoint, Elvira, as we go on to the next session, and continue to think about your own definitions of equity and understanding its implementation and how data is really important in understanding what equity is. We know that you just spent an entire morning reviewing the new content of the LCAP template with your Riverside County office colleagues. As you saw from some of the reports that we got feedback from the field on with PACE and other colleagues, we saw that a call from the field was to simplify the LCAP, to reduce redundancy, and the components that you have now reviewed allow to also see greater visibility in what those actions and services are. So this slide really just is a recap of what you experienced earlier today. And as we explore a little bit more about what that really means in the new LCAP template, you see that for the next 3 years that our LCAP template has a more straightforward view. First of all, it's landscape, and that the organization of the tool itself, the template itself, is allowing for some reflection. And earlier I said it's important to know our history in order to avoid making the same errors or making decisions that might not be our intended approach to it. So the template begins with reflections. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes when we look at the toolkit itself, and in the first session and in our second session as well. But this opportunity to compare the previous template with a new template offers us that time and space to be able to engage in those inquiry processes, to think about where those successes were, where we didn't quite meet the mark, and where we might need to go next in identifying the supports to respond to our students' needs in order to really manifest the continuous improvement approach that we have in our state accountability system. So this slide says the opportunities about how we can use the data that we've had. Again, not be shared. It's not just the previous LCAP template that we're going to be used to identify those successes, those needs, those actions and services, but also we're going to use some of the policy recommendations that we've had from our reports, from the COVID written operations report, and from the other policy documents like the learning continuity and attendance plan. So we're building in this cycle of continuous improvement from a positionality that has been informed by our history and our better understanding of how to implement those research-based practices for English learners. On the next slide, you'll be able to see, again, this landscape approach, the new template that really provides with you the actions and services, how those metrics, those measuring and reporting results are going to be documented, and how you as a local learning community, a professional learning community on your own, through your stakeholder groups, can really help build your new LCAP through 2024 to really understand what specific actions you will be taking to make progress in light of your English learners' needs. On the next slide, you'll be able to see this red bolded area. Again, this idea of analysis and reflection, building from the past in order to see and make a decision as the decision makers that you are with your stakeholder groups about the degree to which something was effective or not. You're going to experience in our next session together an activity which will help you understand what were those actions and document them along the way. So that's a little preview of our next session together. And in that green box on the bottom, you'll be able to see that one of the new requirements will also to be a summary statement that will help you bring together what the goal statement was, what those connections and analysis was, and what you might think of the specific English learner subgroup might need to really have that continuous improvement and growth. So it's a wonderful time for a break right now. We're going to take about 5 minutes. It is 1:36, so we'll come back at 1:41. My math is still working. And also, if you have questions, when we come back from the break, we'll take a pause to answer any questions that you might have.
As it relates to not only the development of the LCAP, but your ongoing conversations about equity and excellence in programs for English learners. In the second session together, we will return to the rubrics and ask you to bring back your previous year's LCAP to do an examination of the evidence and sources of evidence in your LCAP. This is actually some great advanced work for you to be able to identify and reflect on and describe your previous goals and actions that you identified, which of those you are porting over into your 3-year LCAP and how you're refining those based on your inquiry. So as we move into part 2, we will look at the 7 English learner research aligned LCAP rubrics that were developed. As I mentioned earlier, you'll have an opportunity to understand the how and the why of the architecture, the research base behind it, and to ground yourself in the exemplary indicators that we identified as part of the rubrics. The development of the rubrics occurred in 3 phases, and this is described for you in the toolkit itself. You'll have an opportunity to delve into that in your own time. But what's important and what I'd like to uplift is that in the development phase, we did so with a group of stakeholders that was inclusive of teachers, district leaders, consultants, and researchers. We also used, as you heard Magali share earlier, we used the research from Gandara Maria Elena Zarate, as well as, of course, the current research for effective practices for English learners. If you haven't had an opportunity to review the publication by Maria Estela Zarate and Patricia Gandara titled Seizing the Opportunity to Narrow the Achievement Gap for English Learners Through the LCFF Process, we recommend that you do. There's a great executive summary that will allow you to bring these talking points to your stakeholder groups and for yourselves in your small planning groups to be able to see some of the recommendations. Know, however, that they also are very much manifested in the rubrics themselves. Here's the other alignment to the California English Learner Roadmap Policy that you are familiar with. Magali shared highlights of it. As you look across the 4 principles, and we visit into the rubrics themselves in just a few minutes, you'll see that each of the 4 principles is represented amongst the 7 rubrics, coming from the assets orientation and needs responsive schools that our state policy requires for English learner programs, to ensuring that we have alignment and articulation across systems that you heard Nati describe, the visions and uplift the ideas around equity through the studies that she described. And at the heart of that, the systems conditions as is part of Principle 3, and inclusive in that, the professional learning context that we design and develop and that are described in your LCAP and supported by the resources that you allocate and the outcomes that we expect for students. Principle 2, of course, is the enactment of that in the instructional settings and the insistence on intellectual quality of instruction and meaningful access for students. How are these delineated for you? This is an opportunity for you to, at a glance, on pages 5 and 6 of the LCAP toolkit, you can access that electronically. We've also conveniently extracted this one table for you. Why is this table a quick reference tool? You'll notice the first column begins with the state priorities. And these are aligned for each of the 7 rubrics. We identify which of the state priorities are called out and can be aligned to your ongoing conversations across your LCAP development processes. Another important aspect is the bridge to the California English Learner Roadmap. So together, the priorities and the policy for English learners at the state level allowed us to solidly convey for the 7 rubric areas a definition. It helps you envision in actions and services. What do we mean by that? So part of it is increased or improved services, but part of it is how together in a cohesive way, your district tells the story through your LCAP of your commitment to equity for English learners. Each rubric has distinct focus areas that delineate indicators, sharing what those exemplary practices are. Here are the 7 rubrics. These are the titles, and we offer again a definition for each title. And we have focus area categories. Take a minute to just look through them. See how together these rubrics represent a comprehensive approach, different facets of effectiveness in programs for English learners. And think about which of these 7 rubrics might be in this afternoon after your long day together in this virtual session of most interest to you to explore in just a few minutes when we move you into your district specific groups. So even though you'll be with a group, you'll have an opportunity to identify for yourself independently which one of these 7 would you like to explore more deeply. And when you explore it, this is what you'll come onto, again, based on the architecture. You'll have a snapshot of the alignment. Our colleagues have dropped in for you, again, in a convenient way, a link that takes you to a file where you can tick off which of the 7 rubrics self-standing you can come to rather than thumbing through the entire toolkit, either electronically or in hard copy. When you come onto the rubric of your choice, you'll see the definition for the rubric. You'll see on the upper right-hand corner which of the English Learner Roadmap principles is called out and an alignment to that. And on the left-hand side, you'll see the categories that we delineated. Now, we do have rating scale descriptors. Magali described a bit earlier the studies that we've done wherein we've applied the use of this rubric to read and rate different LCAPs. You're going to have flexibility and choice as to how you'd like to use the rubric. We will ask you to use it during our second session to rate your LCAP. But here and today, we want you to just gain familiarity with the indicators in the exemplary column. Take a look at what they are. What does that mean to you? We're going to ask you to contribute to a group Padlet about how you see this might help you in your context to begin to have the conversations that we know you're structuring now as you're entering into your LCAP development process. Here's an example of the English language development look-fors and some questions that you might ask yourself as you're studying your rubric. You'll want to ask those standards, who, what, and how. And you'll see the 4 categories that we stipulated for English language development really speak to the comprehensive English language development program that's outlined in the ELA/ELD framework that incorporates both designated and integrated ELD. You'll see how we wrote the exemplary indicator within the rubric that speaks to that, as well as how knowledge of ELD standards and attention to a progression of ELD standards implementation coupled with professional development is represented in your LCAP. So think about it in terms of the who's delivering the program, who's conducting the PD, what we're utilizing to do both the delivery of PD as well as moving into the classroom instruction, keeping principle 2 of the English Learner Roadmap in mind, and how these processes are delineated, as well as how you're designating funding for that. With all of this in mind, here's what we're going to ask you to do. We'll move you into your LEA specific groups. You'll have time to independently read through the exemplary descriptors for the one rubric that you select. You don't have to do this with your whole group. You can do that independent of your group, although you will be grouped in a common space with your team members. Then we'll ask you to, independently for your rubric, contribute to the Padlet. We're dropping the Padlet into the chat box now, so you'll have convenient access to the Padlet. We want you to, after your review of the rubric, write your ideas in the Padlet for the rubric that you're reviewing about how might you use it? What do you think about this rubric? You'll be able to uplift the voices of this phenomenal professional learning community that we have in the virtual form and read through others' responses after, of course, and while you're responding to your team. And then in your small group, so let's say in your group of 4, each one of you independently reviewed a rubric, highlights of your rubric. So we'll have that small group time. We'll come back to the large group and ask 1 or 2 of you to share a little bit about what you've learned in the process. And of course, our back-end virtual sharing space will be available to all through our Padlet. I'm going to take a pause for a few minutes just to see if there are any questions about the process before we move you into the rubric. We have dropped into the chat box everything that you'll need. We know when we go into the breakouts, the main session PowerPoint goes away. We dropped in the PowerPoint link. We ask you to look at slide 37. That has the instructions for you. You should be able to access the Padlet as well. And once we get you out to your group, take about 5 to 7 minutes for the independent work, and we'll send you notices. Thank you so much, Brian, for organizing us. We'll send you notification on the timing so you can gauge your work today. So
sorry, we don't have access to the PowerPoint. It says that it's for LMU staff.
Okay, so let me see on the back end. So we've, let me drop in a different link. Thank you for that. Any other questions or logistics? We'll drop that in just a minute. And hopefully that'll correct it.
I've also dropped in, while you're doing that, Elvira, the question about the original article from which the 10 rubrics were derived, and I've dropped that link into the chat as well.
Okay, so here we go. Let's try this and see if that corrects it.
Okay.
All right, are we ready to?
I think we're ready. I see some thumbs up. Thank you for bringing that up. That's very important. And we'll be messaging for you so you can gauge your time. See you in a few minutes.
Learners that have been redesignated, we go up to about 84%. So large Spanish-speaking population, very little parent involvement 4 years ago. And a lot of it was that parents didn't feel comfortable coming to our schools and being a part of the program and a part of the process and a part of and building that sense of community. So in regards to stakeholder input, we have made a big effort to engage our DLAC in the LCAP process, as well as engaging our ELACs in the single school plan process, as well as input on LCAP. We have, in our district, we've aligned the LCAP to our single school plans at every site. And so we do have a clear, explicit plan on how to engage our parents in the process of putting together our LCAP. Where we do need some a little bit of work is in our parent surveys. We have parent surveys that each site has been doing to engage parents, and then we've used that data to engage parents. And what we've started to do now is be more intentional about aligning our surveys so that we can get data by site and for the district much more clearly. So I put us there in good, not exemplary, because we still have work we need to do in that area.
So some initial thought processes on what do the exemplary categories highlight for this superintendent? How might we reflect on that, both with evidence from the LCAP, but most importantly, by way of conversation and really thinking about what to bring to the group settings. You heard Dr. Lampkin also indicate the intentionality and the refinement of processes for engaging families in ways that address some of the barriers that we heard our colleague speak to earlier in our time together when we debriefed on equity. So we invite you to listen to the rest of Dr. Lampkin's reflection. You can incorporate this into your asynchronous time. We have 2 other voices from the field around professional development. We noticed quite a few of you selected that as a focus area for you to explore during our breakout sessions. And then we also have a reflection from our colleague at the Ed Trust West, Lainey Wolf, Associate Director of P16 Research, with some good insights on the expenditures rubric. And as this would be a great entry point and transition when you move into your asynchronous groups, you might even start with debriefing on insights that you gained from their experiences and how you might apply that to yours. So in this last part of our time together, we want to leave you with your asynchronous assignment, if you will. This is the 1 hour time that you're dedicating for the total 3 hours of today's session. We want you to feel comfortable with the assignment, with the tools. We know you come with a lot of expertise in data inquiry. And so this is one way that we offer. We offer it through the use of the dashboard. Magali highlighted for you the colored pie charts that usually brings to mind what you saw earlier in the time today. As a way of entering into the data inquiry processes with your team. So this is what your asynchronous time will involve. We'll ask you to work with your team to disaggregate your district's data, and we'll ask you to brainstorm existing programs and services for English learners, as well as to discuss the impact of your findings. Minimally, we'd like you to look at the dashboard data. If there are other data that you'd like to bring to the discussion, we invite you to do so, but minimally, it's an opportunity for you to look at the dashboard data through a disaggregated lens, and we'll explain what that is in just a minute. You see the purpose there. It is a beginning conversation. Some of you, as we had many lead LCAP writers, we have many lead LCAP writers in our professional learning community, are very familiar with that. This is why we actually structured this for an asynchronous session, because this is your opportunity to bring others to the conversation. One of our colleagues in the Padlet made a great connection about how the rubrics can be used to also create discussion and alignment with your site level plans, with the SIPSAs. So when you see that on the Padlet, this would be a great way to perhaps bring in some of your key principal leaders to have this conversation. There are a few steps for the activities. We're going to model those in just a minute. And we're delineating here what we'd like you to bring back to session 2 of the training. So take a look at that at the bottom of the screen. You have the PowerPoint. Now that we have the link that works for you in the chat box for you to access it beyond our time together. These are electronic worksheets that we are making available to you. They're listed in your chat box as what we're calling handouts. So the dashboard activity worksheet, there's a discussion guide, which is handout number 4. And there's also a programs and services, what we're calling a bubble map as an organizer. If you have a different way of organizing, of course, we invite you to do so. Those are the 3 documents that will support your work. The dashboard data worksheet is just a template to be able to enter into the dashboard and be able to, I'll model it in a minute, deconstruct it to be able to pull apart the combined or the aggregate English learner dashboard results to see how those worked out for the English learner only students versus the RFEPs. In part 1 of the toolkit, we delineate these 5 steps that you have access to, and I'll share with you what it looks like. For most of you, I know this is a review. And let me just see if come to the right screen. But we want you to also think about perhaps how this is a way that you could model for others. So this is one of our participating districts today. Of course, as you go to the dashboard data, we'll be looking for the 2019 data, otherwise it'll come up blank. And you're, again, very familiar with all of this. We're going to ask you to minimally look for the progress on English language arts. We're familiar with the colors here. And what we like to focus on is looking at English language arts, the equity report that gives us a view into the different student subgroups in and by color. So when we come to that view, we'll again see for this sample district, and you of course will be doing this for your district, and the sample that we have in the PowerPoint is for yet another district. So you'll have a couple of different views, but we see for this particular district, all students were in the yellow. When we look at the student groups, we can spot that the English learners, that's the aggregate definition on the dashboard, RFET plus ELs, they are in the yellow. When we scroll down, we'll be able to look at almost at the very bottom of this equity report. Oh, let me see. I think I just lost the share moment. Okay, at the very bottom of the equity report, you can see, even though there's not a color assigned to this, you can see the points below the standard, and you're imagining, I know, the 5x5 grid, and where the current English learners might fall on that grid versus the points below the standards for the RFEP students versus the points below the standard and increase for English only students. So that's the data that you want to capture, and the worksheet just offers you the opportunity to capture it in a way that will then help you share it with others and also help you see how that would fall on the 5x5 grid. So you know where to go. You know that this is what we're looking for in terms of digging deeper. These are the same types of ways you can, of course, disaggregate for your local data. The PowerPoint gives you a review of this. We hope it's helpful as you explain it to others, as you work with others, as you encourage others to come on to this. This is just a quick review of what I just walked you through. The scrolling all the way down. And then this is a mapping out of course, how you would document that for your district. This is for a different district. You'll see, however, that there is a similar pattern. Their combined or aggregate English learner results, EL plus RFEP, showed the dashboard colors yellow. They also, similar to the district that we just viewed on the dashboard, there's a significant difference between their current ELs, their RFIPs, and their English learner only. And let's see what that means in terms of the 5x5 colored tables, mapping it across status and change. We see that although the aggregate showed a color of yellow, the current ELs fell on red, RFIP only in yellow, and English only on yellow. So you'll be able to do the same for your district. Start by sharing those results. If you're a high school district, this is the grid that you would use. And this is what a completed sample might look like for your district. We don't want you to stop there. We'd like you to think about the disaggregated data results and go back to that discussion sheet and answer these questions alongside your team. As we're thinking about that, we also will be able to focus on not only the first part of what the data tell us, but also what that means in terms of programs and services. And Nati's going to share a few highlights about that.
I should unmute myself. I hear that's the most repeated phrase this year, unmute yourself. As Elvira was just saying, we have included, and they're now on the chat, several tools that you will be able to utilize in order to help you with one of those changes that's coming in the LCAP, the whole idea of the reflection on what you have and what successes have come about, and reflection of what still needs to be improved. So one of them is the bubble map. And we'd like to share a couple of examples so that you can see what it is like. So for your district in the center, you would of course write your own, and then you would begin to think, what are some programs, what are some services that are being currently provided for the English learners at your school, in your school district? We have an example of one such school district. And you can see the variety of programs and services at this particular district. Now, this is one tool. If you use another tool to reflect on what you have available already, please be sure to use that. But this is something that's being provided for you so that you can dig deeper into the conversation. And that is handout number 5. And if we can go on to that. And again, there is a guided discussion handout, and this is crucial. That's included in your tools, and it's handout number 4, as Elvira said before, because it does provide you with an opportunity to view your data and begin to think, how effective is what we're already doing? To continue to do the same thing and get the same results, it's insanity if you expect to get different ones. So this is an opportunity for you to really go deeper and think of those intentional, specific practices that some of you refer to during your conversations in small groups and also in the Padlet that are going to, and what they are warranting. What is the return on investment? What are the students getting as a result of these? And there is also the dashboard worksheet with the steps included in it, with samples that you saw as well. The whole idea is to make sure that we dig down to those students that are English learners now, not combined with the RFEP, so that we can see exactly where they are at and what might be some services that they would need.
Thank you, Nati, and thank you, Elvira. we just wanted to summarize what we shared with you today in terms of both the processes and also the tools that are incorporated in our first session together of our LCAP toolkit with a focus on English learners. We noticed, you may have noticed that we use several words and that the new 3-year LCAP template also uses the word reflection and building from and building towards, right? Building from where we've been, the trajectory of the resources, the learning that we've experienced, and using information, using data to develop the LCAP template with English learners in mind to really deliver on the promise of the equity intent in LCFF for English learners. The conversations that we have had today, the springboard from which emerged from the Padlet. The Padlet served as a springboard for you to enter into the conversation with your colleagues about what the data is telling you, how you might prioritize the experiences that you have asynchronously. So when you come back to us and with us for our next session, which will be for a while away, we'll be able and enable you to really deepen the language and the content and the focus on English learners using the English Learner Research Aligned rubrics, the alignment with the EL roadmap principles that you all referred to in the Padlet as well, to really begin to uplift the language and the evidence. We also know that many of the programs and services that have been implemented over the course of time for English learners have different levels of effectiveness. So the new LCAP template also allows you to coordinate the use of the toolkit, those elements and those components of each of the rubrics to be able to identify what programs you already have. That bubble map activity that Nati just reviewed with you is intended to do that, but not just to map out what those programs and services are, but to use those as an opportunity to think about effectiveness along the way. So those were the overarching training outcomes for our session today. I want to take a pause also to see if anybody has any questions along the way. We've been sharing a lot of information. We know that in your breakout sessions, they were really brief. You've been in a very long day together of LCAP learning, and our professional learning community that we created allowed for some spaces for you to engage both across districts and also within your districts to begin exploring the rubrics and prioritizing your approach to the next step for the LCAP development. So I want to take a pause there. We were looking at the chat to make sure that you are logging into the Californians Together box. Also, we noticed that Steve posted a data visualization mapping of the outcomes on the 2019 LCAP for the county, for all the districts in the county. Thank you, Steve, for that. That's a different visual representation for where everybody is, but that digging deeper activity that you are going to be engaged with, or setting a time for you to be engaged with your colleagues, will allow you to do that disaggregation and scrolling down through the dashboard, the California dashboard for 2019 data, to see what evidence there is of the outcomes for English learners in your district. So if you have no questions, I want to just share with you where we are going next. So we're building from today's session through that series of tools and resources to take a proactive stance in the LCAP development by sharpening our focus on English learners. In our next time together, we're going to go even deeper into the use of the rubrics. We're going to be looking to identify more evidence to give a rating using a rubric that will identify the degree to which actions and services are there. And you're going to have, through the use of additional tools in the LCAP itself, an opportunity to work through language. And language is, again, the way that our LCAP shows evidence of our local accountability process, our equity intent, and our continuous improvement processes. So that's where we're going next. I'm going to close by just taking a moment to introduce you to all to Dr. Margarita Gonzalez Amador, who's the program director for EL Rise. She's joined us during this session, as she's joined us in other sessions, and she's leading the effort around and through the state.
Thank you. Thank you, Magali, for, I'm glad that I was able to join you today. And I just wanted to recognize Riverside County Office of Education for their participation in this English Learner Roadmap Aligned LCAP Workshop and their foresight in aligning their professional learning across departments and divisions to support you as district and school leaders. We hope that the resources and information you received today and at the next section will support you in writing your LCAP. So thank you, and I'm really glad to be able to have joined you today.
Thank you, Margarita. It's been wonderful to be with you all today. Our LMU team from the Center for Equity for English Learners has really appreciated the attention and the time that you've committed to the conversation together today. I want to turn it back to our colleagues at Riverside County Office of Education. Nati, I see that you have your hand raised. Yes.
Again, unmute yourself. Someone has asked if we can put some of the links up again so that they can access the information. I wanted to make sure that we didn't close without doing that.
Thank you so much. Yes, our tech support, Liz and Maria are able to do that.
Thank you. What we'll do is we'll drop in, and Maria's working on this in the background, the main resources folder or file. And from there, you'll be able to access all of the internal folders. When those of you who have downloaded the PowerPoint, we've hyperlinked a lot of the resources as well. And I know that your Office of Education also saves the information in the chat box, and we're always happy to respond if you'd like to email us. Our email address is in the PowerPoint. If there's anything that you may have missed, we're happy to send that to you. On behalf of our team, again, thank you so much. It looks like Naomi will follow.
Yes. Thank you so much to our esteemed colleagues from Loyola Marymount for leveraging this opportunity for us to really investigate and look at what we do have to support English learners and to improve that in our LCAPs. And we look forward to seeing you on March 19th for the second session. All right, friends, let us wrap it up. We are at 2:39. I wanted to just go over a few few pieces of information. Sorry, it's after 2. I think I got tired. Was using my brain all this time. Excuse me, CDE is hosting a series of webinars on the LCAP. There was one yesterday on increased improved services. We thought it was going to be on the annual update, but they had switched that around to February 2nd. And you can see on the slide there are links to sessions that they're offering it for Tuesdays at 2. The January 19th one obviously already happened, so I put a hot link there to the slides. And then they also have Thursdays at 3. So after the series, after the last one on February 11th, we'll look at scheduling an office hours or 1 or 2 to debrief about these topics and see if anyone has questions around them. So those that are there for you. And then I just wanted to quickly remind everybody we're getting deep into LCAP season. And so the opportunity to participate in FastPass reviews is coming up. The next few slides just go around just talk about the support that our county provides in terms of LCAP development for all districts. You can see there the types of support we have, which you're very familiar with, and we so appreciate the involvement that all of the LEAs engage in with us for these supports, the workshops, in-district support, as well as updates during our network meetings. And then when we go to the next slide, we get into LCAP FastPass. For those of you who are new to your role in LCAP support for your district, these next few slides give an orientation as to what FastPass is about. Essentially, it's an opportunity for your district to share with us your draft LCAP prior to board approval. And so what it does is it allows us to review your LCAP, provide some feedback on it, and that way that eliminates, if you go to the next slide, please, Alicia, it eliminates that opportunity, that back and forth with revisions, because as you know, per statute, any changes made to an LCAP after board approval require another board meeting to approve that revised LCAP. And so this streamlines that process for you. And so next slide, please. So if you want to participate, there is a hot link there at the bottom of that slide that says LCAP FastPass. If you click on the actual survey itself, that's a hot link also. And what we're interested in, of course, is whether the district wants to participate, and then knowing board dates and when you might want to submit your draft plan so that we can provide feedback and long before your anticipated board meeting date. And then just to finish up the FastPass process, after we look at it for preview, then the same review team looks at it for compliance. And so those 3 statutory requirements that are noted in statute for adherence to using the approved template, we check to see, and along of course with our fiscal counterparts, to see if you have sufficient expenditures in the budget to implement the LCAP, and that there was adherence to expenditure regulations. And so those are the 3 requirements that a county office is to look at in the formal review of the LCAP. And then finally, the last few steps are on the just talks about what happens after you submit your draft. We look at it, we give you feedback, and then hopefully that all happens before board approval, and then you take it to your board and we look at it again for compliance. And you can skip that one, Alicia. That's just going more over through the process again. And then the content review is where all of Ed Services team takes a look at every district LCAP. And so we've got cross-disciplinary teams and units that look at the program and fiscal aspect of the LCAP and provides official feedback through an adopted, an approval letter that will get sent to the board and the superintendent once all of this is over. And that last slide there just is from the CDE that just gives you a process map of the approval of LCAPs and accountability plans. And in our last few minutes, I would appreciate if you would take some time to give us some feedback for today's workshop. Both of those, the image and the link, are hot, and we would appreciate any feedback that you can give us, because as always, we're and just like the title of our unit says, we always strive for continuous improvement and take that feedback seriously to inform future sessions. We have 2 more workshops, one in March on the 19th and one in April. And so we also hold separate workshops for charter schools, and we know that some of our district colleagues attend those for the charter schools that they authorize. And on that note, I think we're going to have a gift of time. Thank you so much for hanging in there and joining us for this entire session today. If you have any questions, the next few slides just show the amazing team that I'm privileged to work with from AACI, from District Fiscal Services, from Governmental Service Relations Division, and from the Charter School Unit. So from all of us here at RCO, we thank you again. We wish you a wonderful afternoon and weekend. Please reach out to us anytime that you need support. And please, please, please complete the feedback. Have a great afternoon, everybody. We'll stay on in case anybody needs to ask questions.